So hi everybody, welcome back. So what we're going to do now is we're going to play a Kahoot to go over some of the information that we're in. For those of you that may not be familiar with Kahoot, it's an online game where you can play and check people's understanding. So I've asked my colleagues who are on the call with me today to play the Kahoot and so I'm going to pull it up and we are going to go to Kahoot. So they've downloaded the Kahoot app. This is a really cool way if you're doing groups or if you're doing some sort of larger activity to kind of check for understanding and see where people are. So I'm going to host a live Kahoot that we're recording. And I'm going to hit, and you can get a Kahoot account free. So for those of you that are playing Kahoot, you will need pin 3572179. And I'm going to turn the music. It's supposed to be already off. I don't like the music. I don't know why it's playing. Oh well. When we move forward, it'll stop. Okay. Rodney, are you going to play or not?
How do you know I'm not up there?
Because your name is not up here.
Okay, go.
All right. All right. Are you Magoo?
Maybe.
Okay, maybe. All right. Next up. All right. So here we go. Telehealth ethics. Federal laws such as HIPAA may also be ethical obligations. True, false, or maybe. What is up with this music today playing?
Okay. Oh, my question. What?
All right. So the answer is true. You guys can still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, maybe, no?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. All right, because I turned off the sound, so I wanted to make sure you could still hear me. So most of the ethical codes say that you need to follow the laws of the jurisdiction in which you're in. Our next question, Susan was the fastest to answer that one. Counselors inform clients about the inherent limits of confidentiality when using technology. True, false, maybe. And the answer is true. Counselors inform of inherent confidentiality in writing and verbally. A supervisor may friend a supervisee on Facebook, but not a client. True, false, or maybe. Okay, so the answer is actually false. And the reason being that Facebook is a personal social media and we want to keep our professional relationship with our supervisees in a professional orientation. Now, if that had said LinkedIn, I might have gone with the maybe because LinkedIn is a professional social media site. So I'm still maintaining that professionalism with my supervisee. I would not do that with a client, however. Next up, Susan's still in the lead. Looks like Danielle's trying to catch up. Clinicians may be subject to laws and regulations of both the location of the practitioner and the client. Yes, true, very much so. Here in North Carolina and Kansas and other places, you have to have both of those. In some states, it's the location of the client or the residence of the client, but you need to be familiar with your state laws to know. And if you're practicing in another state, you need to know that state's laws as well. Susan's still in the lead. A client may self-refer for distance counseling services and determine his or her or their suitability for services. True, false, or maybe.
That's written very tricky, LA.
So, wow, quite a spread on that one, but it's actually false. And the reason that it's false is because a client may self-refer, but they cannot determine their suitability for the services. It's actually the counselor's role to determine the suitability and if they need additional resources or whatnot, or if somebody's just not going to be a good match for telehealth. That's important too. Oh, Danielle's moved into the lead. A therapist may review a client's LinkedIn profile prior to meeting with the client. True, false, maybe. Good job. So false. So the reason is we don't want to be checking out our clients. We want to respect our clients' privacy and their social media presence. It's not our role to figure them out before they come in. We want to base our clinical impressions on what they share with us in session. And remember, I said it's kind of creepy to go stand on a public sidewalk and look in somebody's house. That's kind of what you're doing if you're doing this. Moving up. Cell phones are not secure and should be avoided as a means for communicating PHI. True, false, maybe. All right, answer is maybe. If you have a phone that was built after 2017, then chances are it is encrypted. And so it's pretty secure, actually more secure than some other means we used to use. But if you are still using a flip phone, probably not. So it's really important to keep your technology current so that you are meeting the best standards possible for communication. Clients should be informed that recordings may not occur without written consent by both the client and the counselor. True, false, maybe.
What's that? I'm sorry. Wait, hold on. Wait, okay.
Okay, so the answer is true. So we want to make sure that the clients know that it's not nice to record without us knowing it. Clients and supervisees are to be made aware in writing of the limitations and protections offered by technology. True, false, maybe. Okay, and then that's true. So true in that we need to communicate both the benefits and the potential risk. Okay. As long as a practitioner is licensed, a practitioner may provide telehealth services within the scope of practice. So as long as you're licensed, can you provide telehealth services within the scope of practice? True, false, maybe. False. Good job for the three that got that, because just because they're licensed, that doesn't cover everything. So you have to have disclosures, informed consent, and training, and selection of the right technology. So all of those things have to be in place, not just your license. Daniel's still in the lead. Counselors who engage in telehealth services must verify clients' identity at the beginning and throughout services. True, false, maybe. Good job. True. Absolutely. We talked about that. It's a process, not an event. Clinicians may reply to a negative review on Yelp to correct the facts of the review. True, false, maybe. And this one, I don't know that we talked about. So let me touch on this one. So we would not want to review. So this is false. We would not want to respond to a Yelp review or any type of review, because even if you said, well, I'm just not going to reply to my clients, you if you don't reply to your clients and you do reply to other people, you're still disclosing who's your clients and who's not. So it's better just to ignore it. I actually had this situation happen where I had a friend of a client who wanted me to be their therapist. And because of the nature of the relationship, I referred that person to another therapist in my practice because I felt like it was just too close. They were like best friends, and I didn't want to see both of them because of the dual relationship. And that friend just kind of lost it. It was an adolescent and who was seeking DBT services. And so she wrote a really scathing review about how I had denied her access to services and I wouldn't see her and I was being, just all sorts of things. And so I did not reply to the review, but unfortunately the client I was seeing, her friend, did decide to reply to the review. And I walked into the office one day and my office manager said, "Do you realize you have a Yelp war?" And I'm like, "What in the world is a Yelp war?" I didn't even know what that was. And she showed me the reviews and I was able to call my client at the time and talk her through, and because she was in DBT, I used, is this reactive? And, are you using your emotional mind or your wise mind or your rational mind? And we were able to process it. She was able to pull off her reviews because she doesn't want, at that time she was probably 16, 17. And, now that she's in her early 30s, does she want somebody to go back and review what she wrote as an adolescent? Absolutely not. So I have a duty to protect her future self and really try to coach my client into not putting that information out there and having it online. And that review from the other person stayed online for years. I tried to find it a couple of years ago and I couldn't, so I'm assuming it's kind of phased out or dropped in some way. But I had left it up there for years because I couldn't reply to it. Susan's in the lead now. A clinician who maintains a professional website must provide electronic links to relevant licensure boards. True, false, maybe. This one is actually false technically. And the reason that it is false technically is because we don't have to provide links unless we are a member of NADAC. So it's a maybe. The actual answer is a maybe because if you were a member of NADAC, true. If you are not a member of NADAC, the rest of them don't say that you have to provide electronic links. The rest of the professional organizations say that you need to provide the contact information. So that's just kind of a tricky one, a little specific there. Supervisors are ultimately responsible for ensuring supervisees engage in ethical practice. True, false, maybe. So the answer is true. We are ethically and ultimately responsible for ensuring that our supervisees engage. Of course, the supervisee has some ownership too, but ultimately the supervisor is responsible for making sure that the things that need to happen are happening. So let's see who our top people are. So Dina is in third, Danielle is in second, and Susan is in first, I think. I'm pretty sure. Yes. All right. Congratulations. Just a fun way to review the material. And of course, TRW and Magoo follow up. Awesome. Thank you all for playing. I'm going to turn my music back on, or my sound so I can hear you. I'm going to close it. It's like Kahoot's rebelling. It's like, I'm going to play the music whether you like it or not. All right, so next up we have a poll question, and that poll question is, key resources in identifying appropriate use of technology include all the following: Telebehavioral Health Institute, Tame Your Practice, Person-Centered Tech, all of the above. And if you answered all of the above, you are correct. So now Susan and I are going to talk to you a little bit about ongoing training, knowledge, and supervision. So, Dr. TRW, you want to jump in on the podcast because I think you shared these.
I did. These are just some of the podcasts that I like to listen to when I refer to my supervisees and students. that help you earn CEs and to help you keep abreast in the field. So the website links are right next to them.
Okay, awesome. So competence. In the back of your manual that you will be able to have when you're going through this, I'm trying to see, I'm looking at my manual right now. I think it's Appendix C. Yeah, in Appendix C of your manual, there is a what do you know checklist of telebehavioral health delivery competence. And these are, when I looked at multiple telehealth trainings, these were the areas that you needed to have some understanding of to really be able to engage in ethical and legal telehealth practice. So I would encourage everybody to fill out that, to take a break and fill out that checklist right now. And I will tell you that I've been doing this since, the 1997, and I would not rate myself as fully competent in all of these areas. So I'm still learning because a lot of these are still in flux. They're changing, they're morphing, they're developing. So I really, I'm constantly learning too. I have to stay up. I mean, in fact, I block out my Wednesday lunch for telehealth training. So it doesn't happen every Wednesday, but I try to make it happen every Wednesday if at all possible, whether it's reading a journal article, listening to a podcast, watching a video, taking the training, whatever it is. I try to dedicate my Wednesday lunch to maintaining currency in my knowledge of telehealth. In these last couple of weeks, since the COVID-19 started, especially last week, I mean, I've had to invest time every single day to trying to stay current with this because it's been so rapidly evolving. Susan, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to say that competence is a fluid process.
Mm-hmm.
And much like we've benchmarked and we've bookmarked other things, being able to bookmark this and to routinely go back to it, because how things look today, as we have, like you said, LA, we have been revising this presentation up until we made revisions to it while we were on our lunch break. And so the recognition is that it's a very fluid, fast-moving area of relevance. And so the recognition that our competency is going to ebb and flow with the currency of the now. And so just really recognizing that you do need to take that time, and it does need to be an intentional space on your calendar where you're routinely looking at this and going, okay, now this needs to be the skill that I focus on right now. This is what I need to know more of. And the recognition that this training is the foundation. You still have to put the walls and the rooms and the windows and all of the other things on the house. And so in terms of competency, being really objective about what it is that you still need to have a full structure.
Okay. So after you do the competency checklist, what we're recommending people do is really engage and identify 4 areas of competence that you'd like to enhance, and to draft out a SMART goal, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely for each one. So for example, if I wanted to modify my disclosure statement in lieu of what's happening in the world, I might write a goal that says something like, by March 25th, I will reach out to 3 colleagues who have already updated their informed consent and asked for a copy of their informed consent that I can use in informing the rewrite of my new informed consent, which I will have up on my website by March 27th. Something like that. So you want to be very specific about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and then identifying the resources and the obstacles for it. And then, I might share that goal, say, with Dr. Foster and say, Susan, hold me accountable. When we talk on Thursday, can you ask if I've done this? Because it's really nice to have somebody who can support you and provide you with that accountability. Susan, anything else?
No, I'm a big fan of the goal, and I'm the big fan of consultation partners. I call my circle my accountability buddies, and so find yourself some accountability buddies to really support you in this, because again, those are also going to be the people you can call and say, you're not going to believe the kind of day I'm having. I need to rewrite my professional disclosure statement. Tell me what you have around using or what your policy is around office hours. And so not only do they help you become more accountable, but they also become your tribe as you begin to do this kind of work. So not only hold yourself accountable, but your accountability buddies holding you and you holding them accountable.
And then we have some training and knowledge resources. One of the ones that I'll just kind of go through them. The American Telemedicine Association offers a lot of great guidance and videos. If you're interested in becoming board certified, if you're not already, there's 9 modules that you take and you fill out a test afterwards. The SAMHSA HRSA Center for Integrated Health Solutions is an amazing list of resources, webinars and videos and websites that you can do. And then several of these other ones we've mentioned already, but there's also the Online Therapy Institute, which is run by Deanna Nagel and Kate Anthony, 2 colleagues and friends of mine, and you've heard Dr. Harris mention them. And then also the Zur Institute, which is run by Ofer Zur, a dear person who is really knowledgeable and has a great website with lots of information as well. I've given you some supervision specific training knowledge resources, some journals and websites. I really like the clinical supervision and professional development of substance abuse counselors. Although it is for substance abuse counselors, I will tell you it's just great as a supervision guide and helping people know what they need to do and how to structure supervision. And I also wanted to point out Ruby Lowe's webinar. I think it's a podcast actually through no, it is a video through the Telebehavioral Health Center. It talks about some of the things you need to consider in creating a telesupervision practice. Was there any other things you wanted to mention, Susan, before I move on to free telehealth trainings?
Buyer beware. Make sure that you are really looking at vetted, peer-reviewed, empirical data supported resources, because again, much like times of other crises, we find lots of trainings, lots of articles, lots of blogs, lots of things popping up, and so buyer beware in terms of how you are getting your information, because ultimately, to be the most ethical practitioner you can be, you're really going to want to ground yourself in what's been proven, what's been tried, what's been tested, because I didn't know is not a good enough reason to make ethically inappropriate decisions. There are enough really great resources out there to help you build a really strong foundation in becoming a telehealth clinician or supervisor. So that would be my thing around any of this, is buyer beware.
Okay. And then I just wanted to share some free telehealth trainings that we've come to know about. One is specific to play therapy, because I often get people asking if they can do online play therapy. So this one is available. It's a podcast. Roy Huggins just last week it's a pretty short one, but it gives you some things to think about on Facebook Live, and here's the link for that. Simple Practices offering their legal and ethical telehealth on demand, free at the current moment. That could change, but for now it is free. And then Pezzy is offering their 12-hour-ish training. It's usually $430, but right now it's free if you use this coupon code TELEFREE. And here's the link for that. Again, I don't know how long that'll remain free, but it is available if you want additional training. Then we have one additional poll question here. Which of the following is not a multicultural consideration when using technology-assisted services? Does the practitioner have a LinkedIn account? Does the client have access to quality internet? Who should be involved in the counseling process? And does the client have access to a confidential location? And if you choose the answer, I really hope you chose A, because A is the correct answer. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Harris and Dr. Tiffany Rush-Wilson, and they will talk a little bit about multiculturalism. If you're
Okay.
talking, maybe I'm
Yeah.
mute. Okay, yeah, there you go.
Hi. No, I'm not on mute. Multiculturalism. So we want to make sure that culturally competent care is always available because it is so incredibly important for our clients. This includes telehealth and other various forms of delivery for therapy services. We pay attention to the need for language access, services, and what is available where we are. So for instance, if you are in a hospital setting, a private practice setting, or university setting, there can be some differences, and particularly with language access services available to the clients. So we want to make sure that we do have options and opportunities to make sure everyone has access to mental health needs that they are seeking. Let's see. You want to consider client preferences and capacity for diversity considerations. We want to look at different cohorts, different age groups, different cultural groups, religious groups. There might be 5, 10 different places where a person's identities intersect. We want to make sure with respect to multiculturalism, we pay attention to each of these factors. And we also want to respect the client's autonomy. I had a very interesting situation arise once, and it was an emergency situation where I work with a client, her mother does not speak English. And the language that her mother speaks is one of the languages I've studied, but I don't speak fluently. And we had to figure out some ways for her to convey that information about her minor child that she thought was really important for me to have. So generally in private practice settings, we might not have access to language services. You want to look at how you will, especially given all of the crises that are going on right now, how you'll deliver those services and how you'll get support for a person if you cannot personally deliver them in your work. Sorry, there's something in my throat. Okay, next slide, please. Again, culture and language. Although culture and language are major barriers potentially to receiving appropriate mental health care, including what we do here online, they can't be separated from other related and influential variables such as poverty and geography. So we do want to make sure that we are respectful and aware of all of these situations in which our potential clients and supervisees find themselves. There was a study done on telebehavioral health in a northern indigenous community in Canada, and the results yielded that advocacy for practitioners and for clients needs to be better explored and better understood. In fact, ultimately, there was the establishment of the Canadian Telehealth Association, which is similar to the American Telehealth Association, to provide technological resources to potential clients and clinicians who practice with cultural humility. And by cultural humility, I mean not cultural competence, where you think, once I know so much about a given group that is not my own group, I am competent, I am therefore qualified. I mean cultural humility, so that you know that you are continuing to evolve and develop with respect to that other group's norms and with respect to the telemental health platform itself. If you please move the slide.
Trying, hold on, it stopped
Sure, okay.
responding. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Mobile health services, which is what we're talking about ultimately in some ways. They allow access to a broad range of clients in various locations. And by mobile health services, we're talking about the obvious mobile health services like portable health services, but also now in the era that we are in, these types of health services that can be done on a phone or an app or also by computer. This helps us to maintain the healthcare provider, from physicians to various mental health clinicians' duty of care. We have to also keep in mind, however, the affordability of and the reimbursement processes for these health-related services, from mobile phones to tablets to however the person is receiving their health care, and the protocols that mobile health enabled patient care require, provide, and distribute. Another very important point is cultural and linguistic appropriateness of health-related messages delivered by cell phones. Make sure we understand the spoken languages of people, different barriers. We want to make sure that if our clients have visual impairments or hearing impairments, that we find ways to still provide them the services that they need. And diverse populations. This is something that is pretty important to me. I have a colleague who works in a prison, and she talks about how it's really interesting for her that despite the fact that the Department of Corrections has done some research on telepsychiatry, and they found many benefits of telepsychiatry use, including access to mental health care and reduced costs. That some Department of Correction facilities do not have access, including the one where my colleague works, to this type of healthcare, to this mental health care service. So we want to make sure that we advocate and rally for the access to diverse populations for having this type of healthcare. And then Dr. Harris, is there anything you wanted to add?
Actually, Dr. Rush Wilson, I was actually getting choked. I apologize.
I know, I heard you. That's why you have to know where your clients are when you're using telehealth in case you have to send them some help. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Not at this moment. Not at this moment.
One of the other things that I've done with clients too is to ask them, tell me what I need to know about whatever group it is with which they self-identify, so that I am aware of practices that might regulate when people can use electronics. If there are certain hours when they can't use electronics, tell me more about what goes on in your house. What is the hierarchy for using the computer? Can you use this during certain hours of the day? So if we understand the culture of the client through their lens, or the diversity needs through their lens, it helps facilitate stronger, more effective telehealth services.
Yeah, I think, Dr. Rush-Wilson, as you begin to talk about it, I think as far as particularly cultural mistrust about technology and this whole idea that, when people, the ability to, the understanding that sometimes people just don't trust it, and there's a historical context for this mistrust about mental health, and that there's another layer when you add technology to it, and just understanding that that's very real for people. And, don't try to downplay that, and to accept it, and to verbalize it, and to acknowledge that, and not try to minimize it.
And it's also important along those lines to ask people what exceptions they might be willing to make in a critical situation like what we're dealing with right now. When there is some kind of crisis that maybe shuts down certain places, how will that person who generally otherwise does not trust these types of services makes an exception?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. Dr. Stretcher Foster, is there anything either of you would like to contribute to that?
I think for me, I really appreciated your mentions of people with accessibility issues, disability services, having come from a rehab background. I think that it's really important to assess, how your client can access and use. I mean, I've done very effective telesupervision with one individual who was visually impaired and another who was had a pretty severe hearing impairment, and they were in the same class, which was interesting because what I was having to do for one person, I was having to do the complete opposite for the other. But it really made me very intentional as a supervisor to make sure that I was describing and showing information and articulating that very well. So I think it actually made me a better teacher and a better supervisor in that case.
Thank you. Okay.
Right, you guys want to go ahead and discuss the case study next?
Sure.
All right. I'm trying, sorry, I don't know what's going on. It keeps phasing out a little bit. There we go. So we'll give everybody a chance to read the case study. And then Tiffany, I guess you can lead the conversation.
Sure. Okay. So where do we want to start here?
I just really like to ground this whole conversation as we begin in the fact that this is many people's reality that they're currently facing.
Mhm.
That it's not nebulous and it's not far out and it's not ambiguous and hard to imagine ourselves in these positions. This is absolutely what many of our clients are currently facing. So I would just like to offer that to the group before we get started.
Thank you. So where do we want to start? S is saying, I do need counseling. I still want to come in, but I need to see you, and I need to see you in person, and I'll just wait this out, was actually what this person initially said. But now we're seeing that because the person's anxiety and depression are spiking, waiting is probably not the best option, and the person wants the clinician to come into the office to see them.
I think I would first invite the person to have a conversation with me via phone or video.
Mhm.
Because I think that oftentimes when you can make that initial connection, you can reduce some of the anxiety, and you might be able to work with them to understand why it's important for both of your safety in the current situation that you do meet in a format other than virtual or other than in person.
And the context that I might give to that, Lorianne, is to say to the client, you know, client, I really appreciate that you feel like you could wait and now things have changed and you're experiencing symptomology. I think it's really important that we meet by telephone, by video conference, just for us to talk about what next steps might look like and to begin to establish, I'm in this with you and I hear you and I understand you're saying that you don't believe you can. But I think even if you're able to get that person to meet with you via telephone or video, you're able to provide evidence that speaks to the contrary. You know, I heard you say that you didn't think you can do this, but I just want to honor the fact that you came here to this space, you were very transparent and vulnerable and able to have this conversation. What was this like for you?
And also acknowledging that they recognize the need, that this has been helpful and beneficial to them in the past, and that they want to do it again. And that, you know, sometimes only thing they want to do is they want to hear our voice, because as LA said, hearing our voice generally provides them some sense of comfort. It helps decrease their anxiety. And I think a combination of hearing our voice and physically seeing our face can, you know, add the extra layer of hearing our voice, seeing our face will, you know, give them almost a double dose of the medication and saying, okay, I see you and I hear your voice, and it kind of decreases my anxiety on 2 levels. And then I acknowledge that this has worked for you in the past, and you see that things have escalated. And because things are escalated, you reached out to me, and I want to acknowledge and appreciate that you saw that. And let's talk about it and see what we can do to put something in place, and see what I can do to help you.
Another thing too, thank you, Dr. Harris. Another thing that I would stress too is that this person has overcome quite a bit. This person has gotten past some big issues in a relationship that were beyond what they thought they could get through when they were faced with, you know, living life a different way. And this again is an example of how life changes and life shifts. And once again, this person has the opportunity to show the strengths that they have developed or that they are in the process of developing in their session with you, and that they will be okay. And they will be able to master this particular skill. And if after the crisis is over, they choose to go back to in-person sessions, that's fine. But for right now, you're showing this person that they do have the skills to be adaptable, and that's an additional strength beyond the strength that they showed before leaving this abusive relationship.
I just want to call out the group as a whole, because, you know, this was a case that not like only one of us knew about before just now, you know, like we hadn't had the advantage of seeing it. And one of the things I've noticed in our discussion that I think is really important is that there was no assumption of S's gender. If you were listening to the conversation, there was no attachment of gender to the person's identity. I think that that's really important because sometimes we may be getting referrals from, sources other than the client themselves. And we need to suspend our assumptions about where a person is coming from or a gender or anything like that. And we really need to open ourselves up for that person to share their truth and their reality without us imposing ours.
Thank you. Yes, very true.
As I listen to us have a conversation, one of the things I might say to us is, I just want to honor your resiliency. Here are examples of how you were resilient in the past. Here's how your resilience brought you to meeting with me today, even though it's not something you initially had wanted to do. So let's talk about in the moment how this feels for you to know that you can be resilient and be present today.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Frost, as you were talking, I was thinking about, in addition to talking with as I was thinking about ways I could help decrease that anxiety. I was thinking about, when S came up, I might even have some George Winston. I might have some music or something playing. Ways that I could alleviate, I might even have, be addressing and thinking about some deep breathing, as far as, thinking about ways that I could, mellow out. I might even, as far as journaling, instant message, things that we could do online, ways that we could talk and process our feelings, things that we could write and talk about. So it would just be more than a dynamic of us talking, that it could be these multiple layers of us engaging, more than the talking, to make it more than just blah, 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 that, we're listening. So I'm tapping into these multiple layers of us doing things, engaging, drawing in, decreasing the anxiety on these multiple layers, and tapping into these audio-visual cues.
And I like that, Dr. Harris, because one of the things that I've done for my clients, because a big piece of my practice is engaging in yoga and mindfulness. And, I think that in this time, and it would be really powerful for a client to have, say, a guided imagery that you record, and you talk about COVID, you talk about the coronavirus, you talk about the impact it's having on the world, and you use it as a way of de-escalating them in that space of, providing that imagery that they can use over and over and hearing your voice. So one of the things that I tell students and supervisees all the time about moving into telehealth is that we cannot allow the modality to limit our creativity. There's pretty much, if you can come up with something you've done in an on-ground setting, I can figure out a way to do it online.
Yeah.
And LA, as you say that, one of the things that comes up for me is that I have the fortunate ability to be able to see any client through telehealth in the same room. And I know that that's not everybody's reality, in the same room that I would see them in if they were in my office. And so there's that continuity of when I log in, they're going to see the familiarity of our time together. And so I guess that would be something that I would offer to the group listening is, what piece of familiarity can you also bring in that makes it feel like the rest of your time together?
Yeah. Ella, as you said that, I also thought about, how we're looking at equity as far as pay, for this modality, and that as we remove the barriers, that we're able to do the same, what we do in person, we can do online. It's when we're able to remove those barriers that we can say, okay, we demand, this equal pay. It's when we're able to remove every kind of barrier. And, I know the liberty, and one of the reasons that I enjoy this work is because, part of the envelope that I've been given and working at the virtual clinic and doing this work is that I don't see those, or I try not to see those, or I put in my head, okay, what can I do? Or anything that I can do in my office, I should be able to do here, and let me research it, or let me see what other people are doing in the community, because somebody out here is doing it or trying to figure it out, or or even sometimes, let me talk to my 8-year-old, well, now she's 11. Let me talk to my 11-year-old, or let me see what the technology is out because somebody, or let me see what app is out because it's out here and someone is doing it, or it's coming up. And so that's the importance of us staying engaged with the technology and staying abreast of how the field is changing. And I know something that you told me many years ago is just like, attend some of the pre-conference because that's gonna give me some clues of what the trends are that are coming up in the profession. And I try to stay abreast of that and stay in tune with that.
And another thing that we want to keep in mind too is how we can also make sure that we can scale down the degree to which we are using advanced technologies despite the fact that we are using telehealth. For instance, right before this crisis escalated to the extent that it is now, when I was in office with one of my clients who is an older woman, we went over, since I have more than one laptop, what it would look like if we had to do a session or two online. So she had the computer in one part of the office, I had it in the other, and we scaled it down and walked through it very slowly because this was very new to her. So while on the one hand, I have 15, 16-year-old clients or people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, 60s, different age groups who are very comfortable with technology, this particular person was very unfamiliar with how it worked. So we had to walk very slowly through it so that she could still engage it. And with a client who is reluctant, one of the things I also check into is what maintains that reluctance. Is there a suspicion or a fear that they may not be able to do this the way that you're expecting them to do it? And if that's the case, I let them know that that's perfectly fine and walk with them through it slowly. In the case of this particular client, I don't believe that was the issue, but still I offer to walk through it with them slowly so that they can connect and know that they might be able to use this skill in some other part of their lives, not just in counseling, but even to connect with other people in their life during this interesting time.
And I want to stress that something on what you said, Tiffany, is that, we can't make assumptions about clients' abilities. And, I am the situation where I'm supervising someone who's working with the client and they're in the process of transitioning to telehealth. And this client is in their mid-30s and is terrified of technology. And really very uncomfortable with it. And she did the same thing. She worked with the client in her office, showing the technology, making sure they understood it, practicing the technology. And while we may not have that ability for those that didn't think to do that ahead of time, you still need to build in that time to have that type of logistics connection with them before you try to also do counseling at the same time.
Well, in LA, what comes up for me is you even say that even our best laid plans have been foiled this week. We wanted to do this training live so that we could have participants ask questions or whatever else they needed to get from us, they could get from us. So we recognize as a group that technology has limitations. And so we may even struggle at times to use the technology because the technology may fail us. I think even creating some safety around that technology is an imperfect modality, just like people. And because it is imperfect, we recognize that, and it will have limitations and it will have benefits, and it may fail us, but it won't be because, we will do our best with what we have. And there's the recognition of that. I think that is an exceptionally important point to make for a client like us, because there's already trepidation and fear around it, to maybe normalize and typify the fact that it may not work with perfection and fidelity, and that's okay, and that has become part of our rule of thumb as opposed to an exception. I just think that that's really important that this particular client recognizes that there are limitations to this.
Yes.
All right, Tiffany, I think we should move on to the questions and answers, but I really appreciate you bringing this case. I think this was a great case for us to talk about.
Well, thank you.
All right, so for our question and answer period, I've asked everybody to bring 1 or 2 questions that they've thought that or we've heard before that we've heard in the trainings that we've done. So I'll start off, and I think we just spoke to one of the questions I was bringing forward, and that was, I've done X in on-ground therapy. How do I do it online? And one of the things that I embed in a lot of my work that I do with clients is yoga and mindfulness. And so I just, if I'm doing stretches or yogas, I demonstrate it. I show my client, I watch my client do it. I will do breathing exercises with my client. I've recorded mindfulness sessions for my clients to use outside of their session. So I just have learned how to adapt so that I can continue to do the things that I've loved doing in person therapy with the things that I can do virtually. And it sometimes takes a little creativity. If I want to do an art activity, I may have to give my client advance notice. Hey, do you have a box of crayons and some paper you could bring, or a marker or something that you could bring, so that we can, do an art activity when we get together. So it may take a little advanced planning, but I haven't found anything that really I was limited by in wanting to convert to the virtual. It just, like I said, takes some creativity and maybe some consultation with peers to figure out how to do it. So Susan, do you want to answer a question?
I did. I actually put this question out to some of my peers to find out what they're thinking about and being considerate of. One of the things that came up was office hours for doing telehealth. And so my answer to that would be to really consider what has become your norm and your reality in terms of what's feasible and reasonable for you to offer. And if you can still offer 8 to 5, 10 to 3 on Saturday, whatever it is you were offering before, recognize that that may not work for you currently, that, a lot of us have children at home. A lot of us have spouses at home. A lot of us can't move and go into our offices that freely. So think about what your limitations are in terms of how you're going to work before you make a decision around when you're going to work. And use that as a guide for the duration of what this is going to look like for you. Tiffany?
Yes. The question I have is, what if I experience an issue that feels really uncomfortable for me in working with a client? And this was inspired by a situation that did actually happen. I consulted with you about it, LA, a few months ago when a client called way beyond any office hour Dr. Foster or Susan just described at 3 a.m. and had just some really decompensated behaviors over the phone, but then didn't want me to reach out and get her any kind of support. So in that case, we have to use our ethical decision-making model, decide what it is we want to achieve, and then I'll even turn this over to some of you. What else might you do?
Well, one of the things that comes up for me is after the client's stabilized, whatever that's going to look like based on the ethical decision-making model, going back through and having a conversation much like the one you had with LA, in the role play around boundaries, around responsibilities, around duty to warn, confidentiality, some of those things that a client who calls at 3 a.m. may not be in consideration of, but only after I was sure that my client had been stabilized.
And the other thing around that is make sure we maintain our own professional boundaries too, so that we know when we've exceeded and gone beyond what it is that we should be doing with our client or could be doing, and knowing when to call in emergency services if necessary.
I would say personal and professional boundaries, because I think all of us are experiencing stress related to the pandemic. So we're not only functioning as professionals in the field, but we also are dealing with, as Dr. Foster mentioned, having our own children home that we're having to, support through digital learning or homeschooling. And then we also have our own stressors and fears about the pandemic itself. And we may at some point even be battling the virus itself. So how can we create appropriate boundaries that will allow us to practice self-care throughout all of this as well?
And being able to also apply those tests, those ethical tests, such as universality, around what you would do with that client. Would you do that for every client? Pick up the phone at 3 a.m. And so the ethics and optics around this are really important.
Okay, let's move on to Dr. Harris's question.
And so my question was around how do I conduct supervision online, and particularly around how do we create that same dynamic? That was a question often that when I'm conducting supervision workshops, people will ask me. For me, I always go back to building the relationship. And that's what I try to do. And one of the ways I look at building that relationship is that I try to get them to know me. I try to get them, through the use of Myers-Briggs, and I told you the Enneagram, you guys heard me talk about that. And that as I build on that foundation, as I build on that supervisory relationship from the beginning, if I build that solid foundation through solid goals. I talk about supervision goals and expectations. As we talk about that through the supervision interview, I learned early on that everybody that comes to me for supervision, that doesn't mean that just because you can, we've heard it, doesn't mean you should. So just because they say that doesn't mean a good fit. So determining what's a good fit for supervision, that's something that's important. And also, lately, as I've been working with this community center, community placement, is that removing all these kind of barriers, and that through the supervision of supervision, as I've created opportunities for co-therapy, and even some of the department with some of our colleagues, as we have these opportunities for co-therapy, opportunities for observations, opportunities for them to assessments. And as I'm observing their assessments, and opportunities for them to conduct groups, for us to conduct groups together, and then for them to conduct groups with their peers, and for me to observe them conducting groups with each other. So as I'm constantly looking at multiple ways to create observations, that those are also practical ways that I can conduct those online through the same modality with my supervisees. So that's just one way I've been able to broaden that and increase that.
I think too, I want to speak about trust here, Rodney, because I think that it's important with supervisories that you be able to trust that your supervisor is telling you everything that they need to be telling you. And that doesn't always happen. And one of the things that I require, and this is not a minimal standard for legal, but just as a best practice as a clinical supervisor, especially if I'm not affiliated with the agency in which the person is working, I require that I have access to their EHRs. And this has been a kind of a deal breaker for some agencies, that they don't want to give me access to that. But my stance is that as a clinical supervisor, I am legally bound to oversee that person's caseload, and that I am legally responsible and I can be held liable for anything they do or don't do. I need to be able to have access to their files and to their records so that I can be sure that I'm getting all the information I need to be able to do my role within that relationship.
Right. Well, yeah, which would also include consents to talk with their supervisor, and that communication, because sometimes they're reluctant. In the past, I've had instances where they've been reluctant to where, why do you need to talk with them? And you're right, for the HR, communication with the other supervisor, because you want to build that relationship, you want to develop that trust, so there are no hidden agendas, so you can clearly kind of spell that out. So yeah, great point on that.
Okay, I think we'll close it up at this point. I think we've given a whole lot of information, and you will see that we have the references for the presentation, and the references at the end of the manual as well. It's been a pleasure for us to be able to provide this and share our knowledge and our experience, and we hope that you find this helpful. Would any of the other presenters like to say anything in closing?
Thank you for your time. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, consult, contact your boards.
Yeah, I have we did this at the end of a different presentation that we did, but I have this goal in terms of working with my supervisees that I would just like to offer out, and that's the Ask Three Then Me rule that I use with my supervisees. And part of that is just to build the capacity to have a network of peers to talk to. And so as you think about building out your plans, as you think about doing the work, certainly reach out to us, but also consider 3 people in your immediate area that do this kind of work that you could reach out to, that are probably going to be allies during the midst of you transitioning to doing online work and well beyond.
Rodney, any closing statements?
Yeah, I think, for me, it is the importance, and we've all stressed this, the importance of consultation, and we've been stressing this from the beginning, and that is establishing that network. And I know that when I'm thinking alone and thinking individually, that's when, that's when I'm gonna, that's when I'm thinking in silo, importance of establishing that network. And this is an opportunity for that you kind of expanded your network. You have expertise, you have people now, additional people that you can reach out to. So I encourage and challenge you. You have several other people within the presentation, reach out. If you have a question, do that. I mean, that's how I've been able to broaden and become more of an expert in it. So I challenge you to continue to do that and never stop learning.
And finally, I just want to thank the people who have made this presentation possible, which includes Tavera, our sponsor, who has given us some support in being able to provide this to you. And then also I'd like to recognize Danielle and Dina, who have been staff members that have been with us throughout this whole presentation, who are supporting us on the back end of things. And I'd like to also acknowledge Colleen Malone, our own department manager, who has been a big support for us in putting this together and making sure that we were able to deliver it. So I'd just like to thank the Office of Continuing Ed, and I would like to thank my colleagues for joining me and helping me with this presentation, because I just love and just revel in the knowledge that they offer. So thank you all, and we have really enjoyed being with you, and we hope you found this helpful. Let us know if we can support you in any other way.